Near 14 million Ecuadorians are eligible to vote next Sunday, February 9th, so that they can decide among nominees the best for running the nation's future. These general elections will be held amid instability triggered by political violence, energy crisis, and the accusations against President Daniel Noboa for not being abided by electoral rules. The National Electoral Council announced that the voting process initiated on Thursday with the suffrage of those deprived of freedom without fixed sentence. Then it will continue on Friday with the home voting program for people with physical limitations. We go now to Venezuela as President Nicolás Maduro reiterated his denunciation of the acts of corruption of the extreme right, stressing that the sanctions requested by this sector has robbed the country of more than $600 billion. During the closing of the 5th Congress of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the president announced that in the last few years, the country has been in the presence of an extreme right wing that used politics to enrich itself. In this sense, the Venezuelan head of state condemned the terrorist actions that this group has also promoted in the country, promoting violence and economic destabilization. President Nicolás Maduro also stated that with these actions, they forced Venezuelan families to migrate to other countries, profiting with their groups of coyotes who were in charge of mobilizing these migrant citizens. U.S. President Donald Trump met on Thursday at the White House with GOP leaders to present his priorities on tariffs. One of the policies will directly impact Social Security beneficiaries. The encounter was held behind closed doors, in which the U.S. right wing learned of the president's tax priorities. Reports estimated that the tax cut will affect the Internal Revenue Service with the intention of modifying the administration of Social Security so retirees will be hit directly. Although the initiative may be positive for thousands of beneficiaries, it could generate an economic imbalance. 41 states eliminated income tax on pensions years ago with the target of avoiding economic crisis for this age group. Continue with more on the United States with President Donald Trump, who imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for having issued arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This order was carried out in the context of the visit to the White House of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for the genocide against Gaza. The Trump administration alleges that the court issued unwarranted arrest warrants for Netanyahu, in addition to asserting that the investigations against Israel pose an extraordinary threat to U.S. national security and foreign policy. It is important to note that the United States and Israel are not part of this court and do not recognize it. 80 years ago, Soviet soldiers took Berlin to end the Second World War. However, Chancellor Olaf Scholz declared that he was grateful to the United States for liberating his country from the Nazis. From Moscow, our colleague Oleg Yasinski with more.
Hace 80 años, los soldados soviéticos tomaron Berlín.
80 years ago, Soviet soldiers took Berlin to end the Second World War. For the Soviet Union, this was the Great Patriotic War, costing millions of soldiers and civilian lives. An inconvenient truth for the West today, whose leaders, such as the United States President and the German Chancellor, openly deny and misrepresent it.
So my view is that Germany has a good reason to take the responsibility that comes from the bad past. We are very happy about the United States that freed our country and helped us to become a democracy again.
Cambiar la historia se ha convertido de hecho.
Changing history has in fact become a weapon against Russia. Demerit the effort and sacrifice of the Western Soviet people to justify United States hegemony on the European continent.
En el continente europeo.
Scholz wants to insult the Russian people, intentionally, to please the U.S. deep state. This is part of his policy, mandated by the previous U.S. administration.
My best prizes were for the victory over Germany and for the capture of the city of Berlin.
Russia was also not invited to the 80th anniversary celebrations of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Soviet Army. Its absence from the commemoration events is more than an insult to the memory of those who gave their lives to save the world from Nazism. Rewriting history to suit political interests is a way of creating new conflicts.
Es una forma de crear nuevos conflictos.
In the concentration camp, people came up to us. They wanted to touch the stars. They were trying to convince themselves that the Russians had come and liberated them. They were all like skeletons. It was impossible to stay there for more than 3 minutes. It was scary to watch. It was impossible.
With the authority of the Soviet Union, they had no chance for revenge. And now, for the first time in many decades, they have the opportunity. And they are taking advantage of it in every possible way. It is enough to listen to the absolutely disgusting statements of almost all European leaders. And first of all the French, Germans and English.
Las palabras de Scholz son una ofensa no solo para Rusia.
Scholz's words are an offense not only to Russia, but to thousands of anti-fascist Germans, the real heroes of their people who went to the death camps together with communists and Jews, and those who managed to save their lives. It was thanks to the Red Army.
Al Ejército Rojo. Alia Giasinski, teleSUR, Moscú.
In Andalusia, February is the month of La Desbandada, a date in which memory, justice, and reparation for the victims of the fascist forces during the biggest massacre of the Civil War are still being demanded. Our colleague Lucia Muñoz brings us more information.
The philosopher and writer María Zambrano, born in Andalusia, transformed the way we understand reality in the 20th century through her work. At the end of the Civil War, after Franco's persecution and genocide, she was forced into exile in Mexico, Cuba, and Puerto Rico.
It is true that she had established that her homeland was the exile. She settles in exile. Really, if we think about it, it is more than 40 years that she will be living in those countries where she could work, give courses, lectures, conferences, and write articles. But contrary to what it may seem, her philosophical message is not installed in rancor, nor in hatred, but she is a woman who speaks of hope, love, peace.
In February 1937, like Zambrano, thousands of people fled along the Malaga-Almería highway from the bombardment, by air and sea, of the fascist forces, an unprecedented massacre in Spain known as La Desbandada. The Association for the Democratic Military Memory has demanded the Ministry of Defense to exhume the pro-Franco admirals responsible for these war crimes from the military mausoleum and honors, in accordance with the law of democratic memory, which they have not complied with.
Therefore, they are ultimately responsible for the war crimes committed by the rebel navy during the war. In particular, the naval bombardment that massacred the terrified civilian population in the disbandment episode. The two brothers Moreno from the cruisers and Cervera from Franco's general staff.
During the Desbandada, also known as the Andalusian Guernica, between 3,000 and 5,000 people were killed on that journey of horror. There is no exact inventory with the data of the forced disappearances that took place in this massacre. In Andalusia alone, according to Fernando Martinez of the University of Almería, more than 57,000 people were executed at the hands of Franco.
As long as Spain continues to be one of the countries that has the most problems with memory, Spain will continue to be a country in democratic terms with deficiencies that go far beyond being the second country with graves and forced disappearances after Cambodia.
The exile of the Desbandada was not only from Malaga to Almería, but the road from Murcia to the north of France is also full of missing persons from this war. Lucía Muñoz Lucena y Francis González, teleSUR, Andalucía, España.
Ecuador, the election silence has